Hi there and welcome to my channel. It's Rosbot here from Books from My Bookshelf, and today I am looking at my top books in various genres. And yes, here's Tilly as well. Hello. So I've got a slightly new position for my videos. The reason for this is, well, it's nice and cozy for me. And the other reason is I've just recently bought a new coffee table, which is much larger than my previous one. Bye-bye. And I can put all the books in front of me, and they're easy to hand. So it just makes it a lot easier for me, and I hope that you enjoy it. That painting behind me, by the way, it's a print of one of my mother's paintings. It's called Magic Man, just in case you're wondering. Anyway, let's get on with this one. So one of my subscribers recently asked me, what is my favourite book of all time? And I said that's an extremely difficult question to answer because there's just so many favourite books. It's very, very difficult to pin it down to one. So I then thought, well, maybe I could think about 5 or maybe more. And then when I started to think about it, I thought the best idea is to have a look at my favourite book in each genre, or at least each genre that I read, because there are some genres of books that I just don't generally read. So I have narrowed this list down to 8 genres of adult fiction books, and I have picked out what I think is my favourite of each genre. Now, even this was not easy to do, and the trouble with picking out favourite books is that no matter what you pick out, you always feel like you're betraying another book or another author that you also really like. So as I'm doing this, I'll probably mention a few other books that I really feel ought to have a mention. And then, strangely enough, as I picked my favourite books out of all the different genres, I did realise at the end that there was one book that came out tops. I'm going to mention that at the end. So the 8 genres I've picked to look at are historical fiction, fantasy, science fiction. I have to admit I haven't read a huge amount of science fiction, but I have read some. Thrillers, again more for me psychological thrillers rather than action thrillers. Romance, and again, romance is not a genre I read a hell of a lot of, especially more recent romance. I don't like anything that's over sentimental or over sensationalized. So that's a bit of a dodgy one for me, but I have read quite a few romance, so I've had to include that. And then I've put crime and mystery together as one genre, and then horror, and then the classics. I've left out women's fiction as a genre because women's fiction is such a broad genre, and it crosses over with so many other genres. There are other genres that I don't particularly read very much at all. So I've kept to these 8 genres, which are mainly the genres that I read, and I've picked 8, one out of each genre to discuss today. So I hope you enjoy this. Let's get started. So let's start with historical fiction, which is one of my favourite genres, and also the genre I tend to write in. I write more kind of dual or multi-timeline books going back in history. And while many of you know that one of my favourite historical authors is Philippa Gregory, and I also love authors such as Kate Morton, Rachel Hall, and there are lots and lots of really good historical fiction authors. I did have to come down to one book that is none of those authors, and funny enough, I haven't even read his other books yet, and I really, really want to. But this book I remember absolutely loving this book. It's about one of my favourite cities in the world, and it's called London, and it's by Edward Rutherford, and it's a big chunk of a book, and yes, it is a fiction. It's called London, the novel. So it tells the history of London right from the beginnings of the river, the river that we now know as the River Thames, and the first settlers to arrive there right through, he brings it right up to 1997, which is when this book was published. It was actually published in 1998, but obviously he was writing it, finishing it in 97. And the way he does this is to take all the main periods of London's history and turns each of them, creates characters to set within those periods, and tells their stories so that we get the history of London as we go along as the kind of backdrop to their lives. It's absolutely brilliant. Now, he has written other books in the same vein, as I know, such as Sarum and Ruska, and many others, I believe, set in different cities and countries. So I really do want to look at his other books, because this was just so brilliant. So there are chapters such as Londinium, which of course is the Roman period, and just going through. We have the Conqueror, of course, set during the time of William the Conqueror. Moving on, we have chapters, the Whorehouse, London Bridge, Hampton Court, the Globe, Shakespeare's period, London's Fire, so the Fire of London, Great Fire of London, etc., right up to the Blitz of the Second World War, and taking us right up to 1997. If you are ever fascinated by the history of London, then you will absolutely love this book. And as I said, London is one of my favourite cities. I lived there for 20 years. I love London's history. I set some of my book Dark River in London, and that's set around the Thames. London is such a rich history and culture, and it's so exciting. Difficult now. I find it overcrowded. I have to admit now. I find London a bit overcrowded for me when I go there. But when I was a lot younger, I probably didn't mind that so much. This is a great book for anyone interested in London's history. If you want to, if you also like great fiction, this is it. But as I said, if I want to mention other historical novels, of course, you've got Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall series, which was also absolutely brilliant. And if it wasn't for London, I might be calling out Wolf Hall here as my favourite. And then, of course, you've got Philippa Gregory's books. Difficult to pick out a favourite of Philippa Gregory's, of course. She's most well known for her books set during the Wars of the Roses and during the Tudor period. I particularly liked The Taming of the Queen, which is about Henry VIII's last wife, Catherine Parr, which I really did enjoy and found very interesting. So there you go. London, I have put down as my favourite historical novel, but there are others, of course. And we mustn't forget authors such as Ken Follett, Bernard Cornwell, also great writers of historical fiction. Now on to the fantasy genre. Again, it's one of those genres I absolutely love, but there are certain types of fantasy books that just seem to me to be kind of what you might call run-of-the-mill, slightly copycat, kind of there just because they've got wizards and dragons and swords and etc. And I do like my books to actually say something meaningful and not just to be about successful quests or magic or whatever. I like books that really say something. And I have to say that out of all the fantasy novels I have read, I think it has to come down to the one and the only The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now I'm putting up on the screen a picture of the cover. I had this copy, I bought this copy in my 20s. This cover is the one that I had, and it's the first edition that actually brought together all three books of the whole story, which made it a very big and cumbersome book. And actually, because I read it about 5 times over, over a long period of time, it fell to pieces eventually. So unfortunately, I no longer have it, but that is the book, the cover, the edition that I had. And I started reading it when I was in my teens. I actually, the first time I read it was it was when they were all in 3 separate books, and I borrowed them, and I couldn't get enough of them. So why is this my favourite fantasy novel? Well, it just has so much. I mean, there is the epic story, and it really is an epic, multifaceted, complex story. And of course, yes, it has the central quest, but it has so many different characters and the relationships between those characters. It's so well structured, and it's got something for everyone. You know, it's got action, there's even a bit of romance, it's got heroic figures, it's got evil lords and horrible monsters and orcs, and it's got elves. Tolkien's elves in particular are rather lovely, and it's got his invention, the Hobbit. And of course, he drew all that from very much from Norse mythology. I think the depth of the novel is also due to the fact that he basically kind of wrote the history of this fictional place of Middle Earth. So it has this very strong background. You feel like it's all real because it's got so much depth of history that he has written, and he also then went on to write about in the Silmarillion. And he even created different languages: the Elvish language, the language of Mordor. Of course, he was a linguist. He understood about language and language structure. So all that gives the whole novel this strong grounding and depth. But also, what I love about The Lord of the Rings is his own language, his writing. The prose is so beautiful in places, it can actually bring the tears to your eyes. And of course, although I absolutely love the films, I thought the films, given that it's such a huge enterprise to actually film The Lord of the Rings, I thought Peter Jackson did an absolutely brilliant job. But they are not the books, and the books have so much more in them. I mean, the whole journey that the hobbits make from Hobbiton to Bree is an epic journey in itself, which is actually much, much shortened in the films. And you know, in the books, you get that prose, you get the descriptions that and the beautiful language that you just don't get in the script, in the dialogue of a film. So if you've only seen the films and you haven't read the books, I do really, really recommend that you go ahead and read the books. And there's a lot to get through, but it's well worth it. As I said, I'm pretty sure I've read the whole thing at least 5 times. Maybe if I can find another good copy of the book sometime in a charity shop, I might just read it one more time again at some point. But there you go. That has to be my favourite fantasy novel. But I have to just give a shout out to a recent fantasy novel I read too, which I wrote a review of early this year, and that is Advent by James Treadwell. Fairly recent novel, and I absolutely loved that book. He is a new author to me that I had not come across before, and I highly recommend that one too. I'm going to go on to science fiction now, but again, if you're a science fiction buff, then you'll probably be horrified at the lack of science fiction I've actually read. I don't read, it's not a genre that I read a lot of, but generally the ones I've read I do usually enjoy, and I really would like to read more science fiction, and if you have any suggestions for the best ones for me to read, I would love that. And again, it has to be something quite meaningful, yeah, not just about aliens and space wars for their own sake. And I've read some H.G. Wells, I've read The Time Machine, of course, and I've read Ray Bradbury. But the book I am going to talk about now is a book, not an easy read. It was a book that I was really, really glad that I read once I'd finished in it. And if we talk about books that have a real message and a real meaning, then this is one of them. And it's by one of the best science fiction writers, Ursula Le Guin, and it's The Left Hand of Darkness. I had read Ursula Le Guin before, but I'd only read her Earthsea trilogy when I was a young teenager, which is kind of young adult children's fiction more, but this is very much an adult fiction. And she's another author that I really want to be reading more of. So basically this book is about an ambassador from one planet to another planet called Winter, which, as the name suggests, it's semi-Arctic all the year round. But also what really distinguishes this planet from any other is that all the inhabitants are the same sex, and they have very little knowledge of other planets, other worlds. So this visitor has a lot of difficulty integrating, communicating, and getting trusted by these inhabitants. And it becomes his relationship with one of those inhabitants and how their relationship grows. And they go on this kind of epic journey together. And it's incredibly moving, very, very moving, terribly sad in parts too, but extraordinarily kind of uplifting at the same time. But Ursula Le Guin really does make you think about how we perceive people who are different to us. And the fact that she has these people as being all the same sex really gives you an objective view of how we look at gender and those gender differences and our perceptions of those. It's absolutely brilliant. It's so clever. She was such an intelligent writer. A real classic science fiction novel that I think must stand as one of the greatest works of science fiction. So there you go, The Left Hand of Darkness, Ursula Le Guin. I want to read more of hers. Also, of course, other science fiction books I've read, apart from H.G. Wells and Ray Bradbury, of course, there's great comedy ones. There's, of course, the wonderful Douglas Adams, and you know that I love The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as well. But I am ashamed to say that I have never read any Terry Pratchett, and that's another author that I would really like to have a look at. So any suggestions on which would be the best one to start with, that would be great. So there you go, that's science fiction for you. Now I want to get on to the thriller genre. And as I said before, I'm more interested in psychological thrillers than I am with sort of action thrillers. I discovered a wonderful psychological thriller writer a few years ago, and I went through several of his books like a knife through butter. And I picked one of his to read. I think it was the second one I read of his. And I just thought it was the structure and the whole premise of it was just so brilliant. And this is Douglas Kennedy, and it's called The Big Picture. Thank you, Tim. If you've not read Douglas Kennedy before and you like thrillers, then I think you're gonna like him. I have found pretty much all of his books to be real page turners, very difficult to put down. He's an American writer. They're quite hard hitting, lots of swear words. They're quite gritty, but they have brilliant premises, and people whose lives get turned upside down mostly. And he really puts his main characters through the mill. All of his books tend to have this big sort of rise in tension as the book goes on, and things just get worse and worse. And I really liked The Big Picture because the main character, he on the face of it, he looks like he has a great life. He has a big salary, the wife's got 2 kids, but there are things going on that are not quite so great. And there is this one moment in the book, a moment of madness, one of those moments when you do something and your life completely changes in that moment. And he has to completely recreate his life, and it gets tough. He has to basically go on the run. He changes his identity. The question is can he find a fulfilling life in the guise of another man? The other thing I really liked about this book, and what I thought was so clever, was in that moment of madness, he really does make you sympathise with him, even though it is a criminal act. He has built up the character so much for you, and we get to see his mind, that we end up completely sympathising with him and wanting him to get away. So Douglas Kennedy, I think, is very clever in that way. it takes you away from that sort of black and white picture of, oh, somebody's a criminal, they must be a bad person. It really does really make you question that and what just one moment can do to your life. So yeah, I really liked this one, but I also like the first one I read of his was also very good. That's called A Special Relationship, and the main character in that is a woman, and he did that particularly well as well. The woman fighting for the right to keep her child against the husband that she is estranged from, and gosh, is that a page turner too. But yeah, I definitely recommend Douglas Kennedy if you like that kind of book, if you like page turners, a bit of a nail-biting thrill. Yeah, definitely. Just thinking about other thrillers, I haven't read that many, but Cory Doctorow's Little Brother, about a group of teenagers that hack into big government security, get into lots of trouble, but central to overturning corrupt government schemes. That is brilliant too. So I thought that needed an honourable mention as well. Now, when it comes to romance literature, I have said before, I don't tend to read romantic novels. Much of the time I find them either too saccharine or over sensationalized, lots of sex and wobbling bosoms just for the sake of it. I'm really not interested in that. As I've said before, again, I like novels that have something to say. So while I don't read a lot of sort of more modern romances, I've gone back to the classics for this romantic novel. I can't think of any other novel that I can put at the top of the romance genre other than this one, and it's Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. What can I say about this? It's just so well structured. It's funny in that very witty, sarcastic kind of way that Jane Austen is funny. It's very easy to read, considering that this is a book written decades before Charles Dickens and George Eliot. You know, those books can be sometimes be a little bit too dense for the modern reader, but when we go back to Jane Austen, it actually feels a little bit more readable for us for some reason. And I think Pride and Prejudice is one of the best loved classics because of that. I think, you know, we all love that enemies to lovers storyline, which, and this may be the first of them, all others tend to, tend to be copies of Pride and Prejudice in a way. It's just such a lovely thing to watch two people who hate each other on sight gradually fall in love. What's not to like about that? But the whole structure of this novel is just perfect. And you've got wonderful characters. You've got Elizabeth Bennet's family, some of them absolutely lovely, some of them incredibly embarrassing. And the whole commentary on social niceties and etiquette of the time. I could have chosen really any of Jane Austen's books. This and Sense and Sensibility and Emma are my other favourites of hers, but they are all wonderful social commentary of that particular period. And, you know, characters too that we might see now. The fussy, over-dramatic mother trying to find the best husband for her daughters, the quiet but rather lovable and maybe slightly naive father, the proud and wealthy socialites, and the middling, lesser status family that the Bennet family are from. And you know, that awkward, that of that period, that awkward relationship between that class of family and the more upper class of family. It's just so delightful, basically. So I had to put this as number one in romance. And I could include Gone with the Wind. Of course, that's both a romance and a historical novel by Margaret Mitchell, of course. If we come to modern writers of romance, I like the more light-hearted types of romance, such as Bridget Jones' Diary. So books like that. Oh, hello there. Come to say hello, have you? Is it getting near your dinner time? Is that what it is? Right? It's a little, isn't it? I just also wanted to say, with regards to the romance genre, another of my favourite authors, which kind of crosses over the sort of romantic thrillers, is Mary Stewart. She was writing, I think that's in the 1950s and 60s. So they are great, great stories. If you like romance with a bit of a thriller as well. Now, the next genre is mystery, which kind of encompasses sort of crime, detective novels as well. And this isn't so much of a detective novel, although I do like those, but it's definitely a mystery novel. And it's a very well-known one. And I've talked about it recently when I did my video on Daphne du Maurier. And it's Rebecca, of course. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Oh, you love to lick books. Tilly approves too. I know. And I think of all Daphne du Maurier's books, this is probably my favourite. It's also a lot of people's favourites. Wonderful book about this hurried, this short, brief romance at the beginning of the book, and marriage to the man who's had this previous marriage, and they arrive at his big house called Manderley by the coast, and his new wife discovers that his deceased first wife is really going to be the main character in her story, because she is still everywhere in that house. Some people have called it a ghost story, but I wouldn't say that. It's not. It's much more subtle than that. It's not, I wouldn't say that it's ghost, but there is that shadow of this first wife there, and the wonderful, terrible, unpleasant character of the housekeeper, who adored the first wife, Rebecca, and intimidates this rather timid and naive second wife until she feels completely overwhelmed. And of course, it is also can be put into the thriller genre as well. The tension builds in this novel as we find out exactly what happened to Rebecca and how that's going to affect everybody. So great, another well-structured book with a mystery at its heart, and also a really good page turner. Tickle, she's licking my knee. But of course, if we're talking about crime and mystery, then we do have to mention the queen of crime, Agatha Christie. And I do love Agatha Christie as well. I've read, many years ago, read several of her books, and they're always really, just really good whodunit, page-turning reads, aren't they? And she was so clever at describing all the characters, and yet somehow I never ever was able to work out who the murderer was, and it always ended up being a surprise. She was just so clever at that. So there you go. We have to mention Agatha Christie. But of course, there's authors just off the top of my head, Dorothy L. Sayers, and of course people like Ruth Rendell, who are also brilliant crime writers. Lots more, can't think off the top of my head right now, but that's a really big genre, again, that I do enjoy now and then. Now let's get on to the horror genre. I have to admit, again, not a genre I read a hell of a lot of, although when I was a teenager, and I think this happens to a lot of teenagers, is that you go through this dark period where you want to read a lot of horror for some reason. That happened to me, and I think it happens to a lot of people at a certain age. And I read a lot of horror short stories at that time, and then suddenly completely stopped reading horror altogether. I think I was put off horror because of the sort of graphic, just overly graphic films of horror that I'm not really want to watch. But then I came back into reading more horror because of a brilliant course I did a few years ago now on fantasy and science fiction, which included a couple of horror books. And I then for the first time read Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I absolutely loved it. It's a book where the build-up of tension it's very subtle and slow, but it's just brilliant the way Bram Stoker did this. Nothing too awful at the beginning, just kind of vague feelings of unease as the main character, Jonathan Harker, embarks on this journey through to Transylvania, where just things seem to get more and more dark and mysterious, and he keeps hearing these strange kind of tales. And it's an epistolary novel. It's told in journals and letters and diaries, so you get to hear each character's voice and their own kind of feelings and reactions to the events. The build up to what goes on once Harker gets to Count Dracula's castle, and the growing feeling that Harker has that something is really not quite right about this man. And then, of course, later we get to the arrival of Dracula in England, and the shipwreck, and the strange happenings with the young girl. It's such a dark, chilling, hairs on the back of your neck type novel, and really kind of delves into that late Victorian dark areas of insanity and sexuality, which is always really fascinating. Now, poor old Bram Stoker did not get to see this book be a success, and I recently read a novel with Bram Stoker as the main character, Shadow Play, which is absolutely brilliant. Sadly, at the time he wrote it, nobody really thought much of it. So he would have been amazed to know that his book Dracula set off a whole subgenre of horror fiction, the vampire story, and so many books and films and television series about vampires, Dracula type figures, etc. Just extraordinary. But this is the one and only, the original, and if you're into that subgenre of horror, then you must read this one, if nothing else. And of course, there are other classic horror fiction, such as Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, another great classic horror book. One of the first, really, in that genre. And I've only just started reading Stephen King. So, of course, another more modern day horror writer, excellent writer who we cannot talk about the horror genre without mentioning him. But I've only read one so far, but I've got another one in my bookshelf. So I am starting to read more Stephen King, and he certainly is another great page turner. So there you go, that's the horror fiction. I'm just off to get the dog's dinner. Yes, I am. Yeah, okay, let's do that now. Right, there we go. The dog's had her dinner. I've got a cup of tea. All's right with the world. And we're going to go on to the last genre, which is the classics. What is it? You've had yours. You want a piece of apple? There you go. Come on, that's it. No more. She loves apple. So, yes, the classics. We've already had one classic, which I put into the romance genre. So I then looked at my favourite classical author, apart from Jane Austen, and that is Charles Dickens. Now, this is really difficult. How do I find my favourite Charles Dickens novel? And it came down to a choice between Great Expectations and Nicholas Nickleby. And I decided to choose Nicholas Nickleby, mainly because there's a huge episode in this novel where Nicholas and Smike join a theatre company, and Nicholas goes on the stage, and I just find that whole episode just wonderful, hilarious, very, very amusing. Charles Dickens knew a lot about the stage. He put on plays himself at times, and he was great friends with the actor Charles Macready. I used some of that knowledge and the descriptions in Nicholas Nickleby when I was writing my historical novel set in Victorian theatre called Isabel Bright. And I actually had Charles Dickens as a cameo character coming in and out of that novel too. It's one of those, that imaginary dinner table thing where you choose who you'd like from history to be at your dinner table. And Charles Dickens is one of those, along with Shakespeare, of course. So I've chosen Nicholas Nickleby, where the central character is Nicholas Nickleby, who's at the beginning of the book, his father dies and his family are now penniless, and he has to go off into the world and find a living. And he starts out, finds a job at that awful school, Do the Boys Hall, with the headmaster Wackford Squeers, who treats the boys abominably. And what is amazing about that, and this happened with Dickens because his works were so popular at the time, his books did change things. And one of the things that this book did was to actually abolish some of the schools that were so badly run. So books like this made a difference, which is an extraordinary thing. And of course, he also makes friends with this boy that he rescues from that school, poor Smike, and they go off on adventures together. But, you know, as with so many Dickens, it has episodes of great hilarity and entertainment, and also episodes of great tragedy and cruelty. And of course, Dickens' great commentary on the treatment of vulnerable people in society. Yeah, I think, you know, that is my choice for my favourite Dickens. But as I said, I could have chosen Great Expectations. I could have chosen Barnaby Rudge, David Copperfield, Oliver Twist. There are so many great ones, and I absolutely do love Dickens. But of course, I've read a lot of classics, so yeah, we must also give mentions to George Eliot. We've mentioned Jane Austen, Henry Fielding, Mrs. Gaskell, Wilkie Collins, Thackeray. Gosh, so many greats. But yeah, my favourite is Charles Dickens. So that's my list of books, my top books from each genre. And I did say at the beginning that when I made this list, I realised there was one that stood out amongst them all. And it's the one that I did say when I talked about it, that I have actually read at least 5 times. I've also seen the film. Oh gosh, I tend to watch it every 2 years, so I've seen the film several times too. But as I said, the book is great. And of course, it's The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. So I'm coming down now and saying that is my favourite book of all time. Gosh, who knew? And I think for me, it just has it all. And I think, you know, it's not just because it's an epic adventure with great characters, great storylines, and great, as I talked about, depth of the history of Middle Earth and the language and all that, and the writing, the prose. Apart from all that, there's the themes in the book are wonderful because despite all the, you know, the terrible things that happen, it has a warmth at its centre, which not all fantasy novels have. And this is what I love about the Lord of the Rings. It's the comradeship and friendship, which are central themes of the novel. The comradeship, you know, the fellowship of the ring, the coming together of all these different people to go on this quest. But also that wonderful, wonderful friendship between Frodo and Sam. And then the friendship also that develops between the dwarf Gimli and Legolas, the elf, two peoples that don't usually get along. And their journey with Aragorn. And I think that those friendships, those real strong, mutually supportive relationships really are the backbone of the novel and give it its strength. Because basically that is what Tolkien is saying here, is that we can meet great, great danger and battle against the odds as long as we have this kind of great, deep friendship and support from our fellow human beings, or in Tolkien's case, our fellow elves, dwarves, hobbits, etc. And of course, we also have the wonderful, wonderful character, the great mentor, the old and wise wizard Gandalf, who is perhaps one of the best loved characters in the whole of fantasy, and also wonderfully played by Ian McKellen in the films. So there we go, that was fun. I challenge you to do the same thing and make a list of all the genres that you read and try and choose your favourite book in all of those genres. It's not an easy challenge. And of course, our tastes change as we get older. So the list I make today could be different from a list I make in 10 years' time. Who knows? But there you have it. That is my list as it stands today. I'm sure you'll have many things to say about my choices in the comments. And I look forward to seeing what your favourites are as well. Now, next week, I may be doing a book review if I finish the book I'm reading, which is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. But if not, I think we are due the next episode in my A to Z of authors from my bookshelf. And we're going to be on to the letter E. So I wonder if you can guess who that might be. So until then, have a great week and I will see you all again very soon. Thanks for watching. Make sure that you're subscribed and I will see you soon. Bye for now.